In this video, I want to talk a little bit about flipping and pitching during the springtime. Pretty much any time in the spring, whether this is pre-spawn, during the spawn, or post-spawn, this is one of the best times of the year to get up shallow, target isolated cover, and flip and pitch jigs and soft plastics at them. And in this video, I want to give you two tips that I think are really important. They are ones that will kind of help you to get bit when other anglers are struggling or even missing fish. And it can help you to catch one of the biggest fish that live in your lake. Now, before we get into those tips, guys, this video is brought to you by my apparel company, FLIPPIN. Today is the last day that I am running the sale for March of 2024, and that is if you buy one of my USA made sun shirts, one of the only ones made in the US, you get a hat, a bass hat at 50% off. Today is the last day to take advantage of this deal, and there's no restriction on limits. So if you want to buy two shirts, you can get two hats, whatever it may be. All you got to do is add the shirt you like to cart, add the hat that you like to cart, and it will automatically discount at checkout. I will leave a link down below in the description. It is the best way to help support this channel. All right, let's talk about flipping and pitching. I think with all the talk of forward-facing sonars and all that just in today's world, that we kind of forget sometimes that you can still just pick up a jig, you can still just pick up a soft plastic and go down the bank and catch fish. And during the springtime, this is one of the best things to do. Now, I have two really important tips for you, but before I talk about those tips, I do want to tell you that I think a lot of times during the pre-spawn flipping, I really like to flip jigs a lot. Like, that is what I'm going to pick up a lot. This little jig right here is one of my favorites. It's the Outcast Tackle Cage Fighter jig. It's a tungsten jig, so it's a little bit smaller profile, and I've been using it a lot, especially with this little X-Zone Finesse Muscleback Crawl. And guys, I'll leave a link for those in the description. But a lot of times when that water starts to get like in the 60s, I really switch over to just straight plastics, whether that is, you know, like a beaver style bait, like a D-bomb, or maybe even just a crawl style bait like this. A lot of times when the water hits in the 60s, those fish tend to just set up to spawn. Maybe some of them are even starting to spawn. And I really think that plastics get more bites than a jig during this period. Not all the time, but that's just something that I have seen over the years. Now, with that being said, a lot of times when we are flipping and pitching shallow water, we are targeting a little bit more stained and dirty water. And with that being said, a lot of times we are actually fishing for fish that are setting up on their beds. Even though we can't visibly see them, we may be flipping and pitching, you know, next to a stump, and there's actually a fish that is on a bed next to that stump. They pick up your bait and swim off, and you catch it, and you don't always realize that that fish actually came off of a bed. And this happens actually a lot. And the biggest thing that I have seen over the years of me fishing is there's a period of time in the spring when those fish set up on their beds, and a lot of anglers will miss these fish. They will fish over these fish because they are fishing too fast. And with that being said, there are two really important things that I like to do out there on the water. Now, the first thing is I think dead sticking your bait when you flip it up next to a log, when you flip it up next to a dock post, or maybe in a grass patch or in a lily pad field, whatever it may be, letting that bait just hit the bottom and sit there for 20 seconds, 30 seconds at a time. I think that this is extremely important, especially, like I said, when that water temp is in the 60s and a lot of fish are starting to spawn, because you will actually have fish that are on beds and you land right up on top of them. And if you start moving that bait too quick, a lot of times they're not going to have time to get it. I mean, if you've ever sight fished before, you know that sometimes it takes a little bit of working a fish before you can catch them. Now, if you can't see it, you're fishing in muddy water or stained water, just letting that bait sit still and just sit in that bed, those fish a lot of times are going to ease up on that bait. They're going to get right up next to that bait, and sooner or later, because that bait is not moving out of the bed, they just have to pick it up. And because you're fishing in stained water, a lot of times this happens quicker than it will in clearer water. So one of the most important things that you can do is concentrate and really dead stick your bait, really let it soak in a couple of areas. Now, the other thing that is really, really important to do is if you catch a bass, say you catch like a 1 pounder, 1.5 pounder, 2 pounder, always, 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 always flip back to the exact same spot that you caught that fish, the exact same spot. I know for a lot of us anglers, you know, if you're trying to cover water, catch some fish, sometimes it's easy for us to flip up next to a bush or in a hole in a pads, catch a fish, set the hook, bring him in, and by the time you get that fish unhooked and either put him in your live well or release him, you've drifted 10 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet away from where that fish was. Now, sometimes we just don't think, hey, to flip back in that exact same area. And I'm telling you what, this is one of the best things that you can do to catch really, really big fish. Because a lot of times, like we just talked about, fish are setting up on beds when it's a really good flipping and pitching bite in the spring. And if you pitch into an area and you catch a 1 pounder or 2 pounder, a lot of times you've caught the male. You caught the male fish that is on that bed. Now, if you take your time and keep pitching back into that exact same area, more than likely, there's a female right there with that bass. And a lot of times the female, almost every single time, the female is the bigger fish. And I have seen a lot of times where catching a 1 pound fish, a 1.5 pound fish can actually lead to you catching a giant, a 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 pound fish because you realize, hey, that fish may have been on a bed. You flip back to that area repeatedly, you let it soak in there, and eventually that big one will pick it up. This is something that I have done a lot, especially like, you know, on lakes in Florida, you know, where you have a lot of grass. But I've done this all over the place. I've done it up here where I live in Ohio, where you flip next to a stump or you flip in a laydown and you catch a 1 pounder and then you immediately pick that bait back up, you put it right back into that same area and you will catch the female. So this is something that is really, really, really important. Now I'm actually gonna leave you with a bonus tip that I just thought about as I am sitting here talking. And again, we're kind of talking about flipping and pitching in the spring around the spawn. And one of the most important things that you can do is actually not flip to the heart of the cover. Most of the time throughout the year when I am flipping and pitching, I'm trying to put my bait in the heart of the cover. I'm trying to put it in the deepest, darkest spot of a laydown or of a dock, whatever it may be. Again, if the fish are on beds, bass need sunlight to fertilize their eggs. So a lot of times you're actually going to be flipping and pitching beside the cover. Or for example, if you are fishing in Florida, and a lot of you Floridians that are watching this know how important this is, you may be going down a large pad field or a Kissimmee grass field or whatever type of grass it is, and you'll see these holes in the grass about this big. Those a lot of times are where bass are going to set up to spawn. And so instead of flipping in the heart of the cover in that thick stuff, you actually end up flipping in those wide open holes and letting your bait sit in those wide open holes. And if you live maybe where you don't have grass, maybe it's up in the northern part of the country. I've actually seen this with laydowns before, where you have forks of laydowns. And a lot of times I like to flip to that deepest, darkest shadow of that laydown like I just talked about. But instead, during the spring, sometimes you actually want to kind of flip in the open spots in those laydowns, where again, you got to just imagine in your brain a bed being right there, maybe between the forks of a log or wherever it may be. So sometimes in the springtime, it's actually a lot more important to flip in kind of the holes, in kind of the open areas, as opposed to actually targeting the heavy cover. So guys, that's just what I want to talk about springtime flipping. I think if you do this, it will help you to catch a lot more bass. Guys, if you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up. You'll probably like my most recent video that I posted right here, and you can help support the channel. This is the last day to get that special right here at Fin Fishing. All right, guys, I will see you in the next one.